Welcome back. So should you replace all your React class components with functional components with hooks? Well, not really. One of the key things in the React documentation is that hooks work side by side with existing code, so you can adopt them gradually. Classes aren't going anywhere. They're going to be around. For example, the creators of React, which were the developers at Facebook, say, at Facebook, we have tens of thousands of components written as classes, and we have absolutely no plans to rewrite them. Instead, we're starting to use hooks in the new code side by side with classes. Just because a library introduces a new feature doesn't mean that your code now needs to all be updated. Hooks are just an additional tool in your tool belt as a programmer for you to use. But out there in the wild, there's still lots of class components. If you work for a company, you're most likely going to see class components. So you need to understand both things, but also understand some of the ways that hooks might make things nicer, depending on your team, depending on your situation. So React documentation actually doesn't recommend rewriting your existing components overnight. You can start experimenting with hooks, starting to use them, start getting comfortable with them. But by no means is your code incorrect just because you use classes. You see, libraries change all the time. New APIs are formed all the time. That's why when you work as a programmer, it's not about learning the latest and greatest tools just to show how current you are. What you need to do is to be able to read documentation, understand what is the motivation behind the change, what is the motivation behind the new feature, and learn to use it slightly, and then if you need it, if it makes you productive, if it makes your code more readable, then use it. But don't use it just because it's new. So I recommend playing with your RoboFriends app, trying out different hooks, but I do want to go over two other things. One is the rules of hooks. There's two things that you have to remember. You can only call hooks from React function components. So you can't really call them outside of that. Only call hooks from React functions. So you can't actually call hooks in regular JavaScript functions. Remember, hooks are very React specific. So what you learn about hooks doesn't translate to anywhere else but React, which is a little unfortunate. And also part of the reason that I'm not spending too much time teaching you hooks. The next one is that you can only call hooks at the top level. You can't call hooks inside of loops, condition, or nested functions. So you declare a functional component, and at the very top, you use hooks. Just like we have had here. I can't use effect or the state inside of if conditions or other functions. Again, just rules that we have to keep in mind because they are React specific. Finally, you can actually build your own hooks. Remember, one of the main motivations that React introduced hooks was to have a reusable state logic. If you have complex state logic, like let's say in here, having a friend status with isOnline and setIsOnline that you want to use across different components, you can actually create your own hooks and combine useState and useEffect and share it across components. Now, this is very dependent on the component that you're building, so I do recommend you read the documentation, because if you go to the hooks API reference, beyond useState and useEffect, there's a few other ones that you can use. As you can see, there's not that many, and most of the time you'll be using these two, but you can quickly get started in understanding how these work, or even create your own. But the thing I want to remind you is that in your career, you're always going to see new features added to the tools that you're using. It's not about just jumping on the bandwagon from day one and converting your app to the latest and greatest, newest feature. Instead, decide for yourself, learn about what it does, what the motivation is, and decide for your own project, for your own team, whether those updates are necessary. Often, senior developers are able to not jump on the bandwagon right away because they know that new things are constantly changing. New things are still being adopted. Best practices are forming. So take your time when new things are introduced to a library, understand the motivation, read the documentation, play around with the feature, and then decide for your situation if it's the right thing to do. I don't recommend spending too much time on hooks unless you really want to get into React because it doesn't really translate anywhere else. And the reason we've taught this section in this order is because classes are things in JavaScript that you can use in other parts of your projects, other parts of your programming career, versus hooks is so specific. So unless you want to be a React developer, it's not really worth your time and investment learning them. Now I have full dedicated courses on React if you want to dive deeper. But otherwise, I think we're pretty happy with this RoboFriends app. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.